The following comes from the New York Times in July of 2010, a Vox Populi writing to a little bit country. It had never occurred to me that the two parks were comparable. I have nothing against Prospect Park. I have been to Prospect Park. I'm sure if I found myself near it again, with nothing better to do, I would be happy to watch the grass grow, or whatever it is that people do there. And here with the rebuttal from a little bit country. I didn't know Manhattanites actually used Central Park. The difference between our parks is that mine is full of New Yorkers in their own gorgeous backyard, and yours is full of suburbanites snapping pictures out of pedicabs. There are so many good reasons people come to Central Park, I could catalog them. The plush sward of Sheep's Meadow, the boat pond, the elegant bridges, but let me suggest the mall as reason enough. I'll give you the mall, though it only stretches for a few hundred feet. The reason we have nothing like your mall is that it would be entirely out of place. Which brings us to design. Prospect Park, a gracious meadow, an immense lake, grass, water, trees, the trinity of benevolent nature. I think you are confusing ease of creation with success of design. After finishing Central Park, Olmstead and Vaux could have designed Prospect Park in their sleep. In fact, I wonder if they were half asleep when they designed it. Like tennis with the net down, easier is not always better. There's enough stuff in cities. Parks and places you go to get away from stuff. A map on the Long Meadow? What a lovely idea. Instead of reverential tableau, we get the pageant of life. Skaters busting moves near the mall, Shakespeare lovers lining up at the Delacorte, Beatles fans communing with John Lennon. I'll gladly give you most famous, and please do take most visited. Judging from the vitriolic online forums, your 35 million is a tight fit. So when you tend to hear about Prospect Park and Central Park in the same sentence, as you heard with the back and forth in the New York Times editorial, it tends to be Prospect Park versus Central Park, and the arguments for which one is superior and for what reason. And to be honest, it seems like this discussion is less of a discussion of which park is superior and more a little bit about borough pride. That all said, Central Park and Prospect Park are very different creatures from one another, not just in what you walk through and experience, but also in how they were conceived and designed. Now, Central Park, not to be understated, has a lot of vision and ideas that go into it, but with that said, come a lot of compromise as well as pitfalls of trying to work through problems in real time as they come up. This one, Prospect Park being the follow-up park, allowed Olmstead and Vaux to kind of learn from that. They benefited from a little bit of luck, but certainly a lot more experience. To give you the simple basics on Brooklyn's desire for a park, as we've talked a bit about how Central Park in Manhattan got off the ground, Brooklyn is watching what their neighboring city, New York City, is up to, breaking ground on their initial 750-acre plot. And yes, today, it is one of the 5 boroughs of New York, but when it truly was its own separate city, Brooklyn was growing and growing fast. In the decade from 1850 to 1860, it went from being the 7th largest city in the United States to the 3rd largest, with only Philadelphia in between. And it too wanted a city park, as opposed to its unusual green space alternative of Greenwood Cemetery. So in 1859 to 1860, James S.T. Stranahan, a pretty influential leader both in politics and land holdings in Brooklyn, champions for and ultimately heads up the Parks Commission for Brooklyn. 2 things come out of this first year: an initial year of surveying and purchasing land, as well as a vision for what the commission wanted out of their city's park. So if you want to design a park in Brooklyn, Brooklyn decided that there are 4 essential checklist items that need to be on it. First, a reservoir for clean, reliable drinking water for the community. Second, a parade ground that was set up, especially post-Civil War, for there to be military exercises for both current, but also at that time, veteran forces from the Civil War. Third, there's a desire for a botanical gardens. It's kind of a beautiful floral presence in some aspect within the park grounds. And these 3, they're pulled directly from the playbook for Central Park from a few years prior. The one thing, though, that Brooklyn has that's kind of unique to this area is in the northeast corner of the grounds, and going back to the Revolutionary War, is a place called Mount Prospect, and this is how Prospect Park will eventually get its name. In the Revolutionary War, the Continental Army faced off against British and Hessian troops in what was eventually the invasion and overtake of New York in the early days of the conflict. This area wanted to be memorialized in some way. So if you want to design a park in Brooklyn, these are the 4 checklist items that you need to include. Now, 2 of those points are already well underway for the would-be designer. In 1856, right by Mount Prospect, a 3.5-acre aqueduct was already completed and filled, serving the nearby community. So the conventional wisdom is that the nearby acreage, Mount Prospect, which has a peak at 198 feet, will give the designer the idea to include a nice scenic overlook. Oh, and one more thing. The designer only has 320 acres to work with, which is less than half of Central Park's size. It's a lot you have to jam into a much smaller portion of land, a tall order for no matter who tackles it. The first person up to give it a shot is Egbert Vieli in the early 1860s. Now, what he put forward was very admirable, given the constraints he had to work with, but what he puts forward is a very paint-by-numbers approach, and his ideas, they do reflect that. Ultimately, the Civil War is what sees there be a pause in Egbert Vieli's vision, as well as Stranahan and the Brooklyn Parks Commission going forward with initially the idea for Prospect Park. It's about 1862 to 1864 where we see this hiatus, and really not until post-Civil War that activity really gets going up again. But in that interim, there's one thing that kind of bothers the Brooklyn Parks Commission, and it's that the problem with Mount Prospect being part of Vieli's design is that you have Flatbush Avenue going through the middle of it, basically splitting up the park into 2 different sections. And they just want to know if there's potentially a different way or maybe another workaround for this vision. So with that, Stranahan decides to make the move to call in the design team behind Central Park. So the Olmstead and Vaux that show up in 1865 when they're called upon are viewed very differently from the ones that had submitted the Greensward Plan when it was selected for Central Park back in 1857. So back then, Central Park had been underway for 2 years already, and the work that they had put forward was seen as something that could be collaborated on, and they were treated as first amongst equals amongst a whole group of people. Now, when Stranahan is calling upon them in 1865 with a park already under their belt, they're seen more as experts, and they're able to propose ideas that they wouldn't have been able to a few years prior. They suggest 2 things that fundamentally transform Prospect Park. The first is they want to expand the grounds of Prospect Park, but number 2, those 4 checklist items that were required, they want them entirely moved off the grounds. For Mount Prospect, they make the decision to let that land go and entirely redraw everything to be west and south of Flatbush Avenue. The park will not be serving as a green shield for the reservoir anymore, and if Mount Prospect is to be a park, it'll have to be done separately from their Prospect Park proposal. As for the Botanical Garden, to be honest, when you go through the history of public parks, it always seems to be the first to get scrapped, whether it's budgetary or just gets moved down the priority list. But I do want to say as an aside here, because this history is a separate video, is that these wish list items do find life down the road. When the new Crone Aqueduct is integrated into Brooklyn, the city's water is no longer dependent on the reservoir and torn down. What goes up in its place is the site of the Brooklyn Public Library and the Brooklyn Museum, both of which are what now border Mount Prospect Park formal, as well as at Brooklyn Botanical Gardens. It took a combined about 45 years for these to be realized, but those 3 wish list items do have a happier ending. For a little bit of luck that comes their way, in negotiating what would be the acquisition of more land for their design, Brooklyn secures 40 acres, and in 1868, south of their formal submission, it lives on as the requested parade grounds. Still called this, it is a massive series of athletic fields and complexes for a variety of sports and recreation. And everything north of that is now acquired as additional land. This was an expensive undertaking, as the price tag includes some already established parts that include the Litchfield Villa along Prospect Park West on the park grounds today. But the little other part of luck that swings their way is that the people anticipating a Vaux Olmstead park, now looking to acquire land bordering the park, see nothing but lucrative dollar sign potential. Although this does include people on the Brooklyn Parks Commission. That covers the luck part. The experience that Vaux and Olmstead had gained over the last decade is what makes it to paper in 1866. And the end result is a massive canvas to now work with. Prospect Park ends up being 586 acres in total. More importantly, the decision is made to break up Prospect Park into 3 major sections. There's going to be a massive lake and water course to the south. In the middle section, a more wooded and nature walk and ravine-like area, and then to the north, nice open meadows and open spaces. It is a much simpler design when compared to Central Park, but a major theme going forward as we walk through the park is that the construction and execution of Prospect Park really shows that less is more. By far, what defines the northern part of the park is this, the Long Meadow, coming in at about 90 acres and spans almost an entire mile from one portion of Prospect Park west to the next. And according to the Prospect Park Alliance, this is the longest uninterrupted field in any city park in the United States. And yes, that is very specific wording. But amongst this open field and stretch, there remain spots of shade and even a few structures to take advantage of. Such as this 1927 picnic house, which replaced an 1876 structure that was lost due to a fire. It's designed to accommodate larger and more formal indoor diners or events. Also, many an outdoor picnicker will find themselves near here, strategically near its bathrooms. Also, that less is more approach is kind of philosophical too. The Brooklyn Parks Commission was not as interested in regulating what was permissible on the grounds and when and where to the extent that the Central Park Commission was. Things like picnics, games, they're all okay. They did want people to have a permit for larger gatherings, but they incentivized that by having formal picnicking areas to accommodate those larger groups. This was a huge decision that should seem obvious, but was foreign a borough away. And when I also make the argument of less is more, that also includes logistics. Most of your travel in Prospect Park, because it's a smaller area, from point A to point B, is realistically within a half-hour walk. It's a much more accessible park, and for that reason, Olmstead and Vaux did not have to repeat key features. Now, there are other meadows. You saw me do a previous segment from one, but they can really concentrate in bringing the most out of iconic parts of their park by only having one per visit. And this middle portion here, the ravine, is dense woodland that kind of hides in between the North Meadows and the Southern Watercourse. It's really kind of hard to give you a sense on camera as to how massive this portion of the park is, other than to say you have a bunch of pedestrian, bridle, and other nature trails that weave in and out of one another. Some are relatively easygoing, some are pretty hilly, requiring a little oomph to get up and down, but we are also revisiting this quite a lot as we work our way back through the Southern Watercourse. So for designers of Prospect Park, what they decided to do was introduce an elaborate watercourse that went through several portions of the park. And the start of it actually happens with the structure behind me. Originally, as designed in 1869, this area here served as a well house, but also a boiler house for the water being introduced into the system. About 750,000 gallons of water would go from this area and actually shoot uphill through Lookout Hill behind me, getting to the top of our course and where we'll pick things up. It all starts with the waterfall behind me. Now, this is named after a creek kind of up Poughkeepsie Way, invoking a lot of kind of quieter parts away from the city in different regions. This Fallkill Falls hides both the plumbing as well as gives a very dramatic entryway for what starts a mile-long watercourse. And one fun little feature as we leave the falls is that there's a dog beach right here on the beginning of the upper and lower ponds as the water goes downhill from here. It's been here since 1998, and it's a fun little spot where some of the neighborhood pets get to do some aquatic swimming, some fetch, and just have a little fun, making it a pretty popular spot on some warmer days. And the next portion, as you reach bridges that start taking on wood and stone shape, is a place called Ambergill, which is supposed to remind you more of a view out of the Adirondacks. And this area of the park is one of the quieter parts of the park here in the woodlands, and as a result is only open during the daytime hours, but they do reward you with some of the quieter and more pristine parts of the park. And every transition is really fun here too along the water course, such as the cascades here at Binnen Falls, as the Binnen water portion becomes our next section wall water. As for Lull Water, this is the portion that's based off the Serpentine in London's Hyde Park. The streams end and open up into a much larger body of water. This is the first portion of the watercourse that really encourages people to sit by lakefront and relax, but also it features several cast iron bridges, some larger enough to accommodate the bike paths and as well as the carriages. So there are many ways to experience the water, both lakefront but also from above. And from here, the water works its way down to its final location. And finally, behind me, all the water arrives here in this 55-acre lake, Prospect Lake, that goes the entirety of the southern edge of the park from the west to the east. Now, Olmstead and Vaux, what they really wanted to do with all of their water courses was at different points, you're going to experience different looks, different kind of regions and experiences they had in their travels. But hopefully, where I've explained that before in previous episodes, you really can see it in action here behind me. And if I were to stop the video right here, right now, I'd hope that the beauty and the nature I've been showcasing would be enough to appreciate and stand on its own. And don't get me wrong, I didn't just take you through the fields, the trees, and the water if I didn't think that they were the star attractions here. And I do want to get back to adding to the list of some of the inclusions that are here in the park, especially being here right by the waterfront and starting with the two people that are responsible for this park getting off the ground. So first, the relaxation part. Calvert Vaux knew that Prospect Lake was the park's boldest accomplishment. So his waterfront shelters, like the ones replicated here, to say nothing of the benches and the open land surrounding, are all encouraged to relax and enjoy the open vista. Second was the introduction of attractions into the watercourse. Behind me is one such. This originally called Music Island, and the idea was to have bands set up and perform from there and let the audience ingeniously spread out here along the adjoining coastline and drives to get whatever vantage they want to listen. Amongst some people represented throughout the concert grove here include Beethoven and Mozart, but even Abraham Lincoln hides in the statues represented behind me. Now, this was a short-lived experiment, working mainly for larger bands, not really ideal later for smaller ensembles, orchestras, and any group that required amplification. So again, short-lived experiment, but example of trying to bring new features and kind of new attractions into the follow-up park. Of course, more conventional options are here as well. This is neither the first nor the current, but this 1905 built boathouse is here on the site of Lullwater where boating originally took place. Now add to this ice skating, fishing, and certainly a multitude of paths that go along the entire water course. Recreation is not only permitted, but encouraged, so these bodies of water are more than just things to look at. Also, really quickly, in a history that tends to be kinder to Olmstead, I want to take a moment and appreciate the architecture work that was done by Calvert Vaux. Mainly things like this, the clever use of bridge and tunnel work that work around drives and entrances in and out of the park. Last time around, this work had to be done and changed in real time from the original Greensward Plan, but for Prospect Park, he got to conceive and design this from the very beginning. And on a larger note, everything that Calvert Vaux put in Prospect Park truly feels like it belongs. Sadly, the financial crisis of 1873 did stop some of Vaux's architecture from ultimately making it into the park. But in the case of Prospect Park, I appreciate more because when you encounter it, there's less distracting you from it. Even with some of the architectural contemporaries who differed very much from his subtle and pastoral vision for the park. So on that note, I don't want to get too bogged down with the years featuring Parks Commissioner Robert Moses, other than a quick overview. Starting in 1934 with his tenure, decisions for parks went from being done on a borough level to being done by the unified New York City Parks Department. Given Prospect Park's simpler design, thankfully Robert Moses didn't fundamentally transform Prospect Park. Some of the additions done by the Parks Department are actually pretty welcome, including the bandstand here. It features the occasional concert and event. Currently, what it's doing is an art installation done by the Brooklyn High Art Machine. Instead, I want to focus on the more recent years, namely about the last 3 decades. If you saw my episode Conservancy, you know about the private organizations that align with the City Parks Department in order to revitalize certain green spaces. For this one, it's the Prospect Park Alliance. It was founded in 1987 by Tupper Thomas and Terry Christensen. This started with undoing wear and tear and neglect left from the 70s and the 80s in this park, but really that restoration work continues through to this day. If you've appreciated any of the scenery and looks you've seen throughout this video, it really is the Prospect Park Alliance being at the forefront for keeping this park looking the way it is. The restoration is still an ongoing process. A lot of what you've been seeing with me is showing you the end result, but some places in the park still show that work has to be done to restore the then and now of this park. But the last feature of the park to mention does mention the most recent addition. The site for that is Lakeside, specifically the LaFranc Center, home to a year-round skating rink and seasonal boating, to name a few of its activities and features. It's ingeniously placed by the southeast corner so that it is easily accessible for those who want to make this a priority, while still leaving the rest of the park untouched for those who just want to walk around and take in the scenery. I want to close by saying that you've seen a lot of strategic filming that we did during off-peak hours and or social distancing in other parts of the park, so I don't want to leave you with the impression that this park is ignored by its residents. This park and community is quite the opposite of, well, a ghost town. If anything, a year like this one has really brought the aim of parks like this back into focus. These parks exist with the core understanding that both the city life and times they were built in were challenging. So let these green spaces be an escape from that, regardless of what times, station, and health they find you in. They are not perfect, but in a year where I never would have guessed travel, work, and just the social nature of my professional and personal life would be put on hiatus, I'm in a lot better spirits with the daily hour I spend in them. This was true of the smaller parks like Fort Washington and Highbridge Park when my year started in Washington Heights, to the signature ones like this one here in Brooklyn as the year comes to an end. So my hope is really that over this series, you've seen more than just beyond some of the beauty and stories, but really how these parks have evolved to serve the communities they find themselves within. And whether you were a local who was looking to expand a little bit on your knowledge, whether you are a future visitor who's looking to learn a little bit more about something that's on your checklist of things to see, I hope this series has served you well. As always, stay safe, stay healthy, stay awesome, and I look forward to the seasons to come, in person, virtually, wherever they find us. Take care, and thank you for joining me for Virtual Park Bites.